Hello everyone, welcome to the lecture series on Foundations of Deep Learning Concepts and Applications. Today let us discuss on neural networks. Before we get into, let us see, in the previous session you have learned about history and evolution of deep learning. We have seen the importance of computational efficiency in deep learning. You have also seen the overview of machine learning and deep learning and the key differences between machine learning and deep learning with example. And today in this lecture we will be studying the most fundamental building block of deep learning, which is neural networks. Here are the different contents that we are going to see as part of this session. We will first see the biological inspiration for neural networks, the mathematical representation of a neuron, the perceptron and the basic components of perceptron, the perceptron learning model, various types of perceptron, single layer perceptron. We will understand this with a numerical example, and finally we will end the session with the limitations of single layer perceptron. Let us understand, before we go into an artificial neuron, we will understand the working mechanism of biological neuron, which is the basic inspiration for building a neural network. So when you take a human brain contains billions of neurons that are interconnected with each other. So when they are interconnected, that means something is processed in one neuron and that processed information will be passed to another neuron. If one information has to pass to another information, we require a channel through which the information can be passed. That channel we call it as an axon. And when if this axon is carrying the information, it carries the information through electrochemical signal. So let us look into all of this into an diagrammatic way here. So we have an input which will enter into the neuron. So the input will enter through dendroids. Dendroids is dendroids is a place through which the input will enter, and where the input will enter, the input will enter into a nucleus. And what is the main work of this nucleus? Inside this there is some processing that is happening. And what is that processing? It integrates all the inputs which is coming into it. It combines all of this input, and once it combines, we have a cell body which is the entire portion, we call it as a cell body, and inside this we have an nucleus which is responsible for the integration of all of the input which is coming from a dendrite. And once the information is being processed, the information is being transmitted through an axon, and it carries an electrochemical signal. Okay. Once we understand this, let us now look into what exactly is this axon. And if you look into the structure of an axon is a thin fiber-like projection, and the terminal connect, the axon terminal connect to another neuron. We have an axon, and the terminal of the end of this is connected to another neuron. So that axon can carry the information and it can pass from one neuron to another neuron. But here we have a small problem. What is that? Can you see, from one neuron to another neuron there is a small gap. So when there is a small gap, ideally the information will not pass. So that is where the role of synapse will come into. What is an synapse? It is an connection point between the axon terminal of one neuron and the dendroids of another neuron. Now, axon is the one which is carrying the electrical signal. Now, when electrical signal cannot pass because there is a gap here. So, what happens when it reaches to an synapse? Synapse will convert this electrical signal into a chemical signal. Now, so that it can pass through this gap. Now, this chemical signal, we call it as an neurotransmitters. So, if the information that is passed through this axon, if the strength of this signal is very large or very high, then synapse will release the more neurotransmitters. So, which means there can be more neurotransmitters that can be released, or it can be a less neurotransmitters that can be released. When more neurotransmitters are released, we say that the signal is stronger. When less neurotransmitters are released, we say that the signal is weaker. Therefore, the synapse is the one which decides how much of a message has to get passed to a next neuron. So, I think we have made it, you have understood, or you would have recalled the basic working mechanism of a biological neuron. So, with this, let us go into how with this we have built an artificial neuron. So, first let us go step by step. First, there is an input which is entering into the nucleus. So, that input is entering through a dendroids. So, that dendroid part equivalent is the input. Now, from where this input comes? From our data set, we will have, let us take a structured data CSV file. We have features. These features are our input. Next, we have inside, we have this nucleus. So, I must telling one point, this is an important point here. When now we have seen synapse is one which will decide how much of information has to be passed to a next neuron. So, which means from the previous neuron, the information would have entered inside this cell body. So, what exactly happens inside this nucleus is when a neuron receives an enough input signals through dendroids, it's a cell body. So, it is a cell body which is in biological one, we call it as soma. This is the one which decides whether a total signal is strong enough that you can trigger a response. If that combined signal crosses a particular threshold, then a neuron fires. So, this is the concept there. So, which means we have seen when you do the summation, when it crosses a certain threshold, how soma, the combined effect, if it crosses a particular threshold, how that neuron fires. So, that part should be mimicked when we build an artificial neuron. So, that entire is seen inside something called as a node. So, when we see a node, there are two operations that are taking place. The first operation is summation, and the second is how the combined signal, if it is greater than a particular threshold, how a neuron fires. That concept here is an activation function. So, here we have a dendroids. Dendroids equivalent is an input. Then we have a cell body. This cell body we call it as a node, which is mainly responsible for performing two operations. One, it is used for an integration. It has to take all of the inputs, and then we have once when you combine all of the input, when the signal is strong enough, then it fires. That concept is mimicked by an activation function here. Okay, and the most important is we have an axon. The terminal connect of this axon, we have an synaptic terminal or synapse. So, that here axon we call it as a connection, and the synapse we call it as an weights. So, with all of this correlation between biological and then artificial one, now let us look into what exactly is an ANN, that is artificial neural network. It is an computational model where there we were dealing with the electrochemical signals, but here it is an artificial one where you will be dealing with the numbers and you will be performing some arithmetic operations. Therefore, it is a computational model which is basically inspired by this structure of biological neurons only. And however, we are seeing the functioning of this biological neuron, the same thing is being mimicked in an artificial neuron also. How through dendroids the multiple inputs enters, through here input enters into the node. How we have an synapse where the strength of the synapse, that is the synapse chemical strength, that is equivalent to the weights here. The weights numerical value and then synapse strength is correlated. So this summation input is getting multiplied with the weight, and you are doing you will multiply input, multiply them with the corresponding weights, and then we will sum them up, and then we will pass it to an activation function. And once you pass it to an activation function, how biological neuron fires. Similar way, here activation function also gives us the corresponding action. So this is how the correlation between biological neuron and then the artificial neuron. So with this, let us get into the most important concept called the mathematical representation of a neuron. How do we mathematically represent it? So let's look into. So we have x1, x2, x3. These are the various inputs that we are taking, and each of this is passed to a neuron. So inside there are two mathematical operations that take place. One is the summation part, and how exactly you are what exactly is the summation here? Summation is we are multiplying all of these inputs with its associated weight. So we have summation x1 w1, we have x2 w2, and we have x3 w3 if we have a multiple, and so on up to xn wn. So this is what is the first part, and we have something called as bias. Let us understand this in a while, but let us look into what exactly is this x1 w1, x2 w2. So in short, we can write this whole as x into w. Now, suppose here is a small example. Suppose if there is a requirement where you want to predict if the if a student will pass based on 3 input features. What are the 3 input features? Let us assume we have x1 as the number of hours studied, x2 as attendance percentage, and x3 as the previous grade. So for a particular student, x1 a number of hours studied, let the value be 8, and attendance percentage is 90%, and the previous grade the student has obtained 75%. Now for each of the input, so what is that we have seen? For every of the input there is a weight associated with it. So for hours studied we have 0.4, for the second input we have the weight 0.3, and for the third input we have the weight 0.2. Now, what is the mathematical operation that we are doing? The mathematical operation is x is multiplied with w. When if you look into when we look into this particular, we cannot directly multiply these two. So if at all if you want to perform x into w, it is not possible. Therefore, what is that we do? We take any one of this vector, we are going to take a transpose of it. Either you take x transpose, so that we are going to get 8, 90 and 75, and you can multiply it with 0.4, 0.3 and 0.2. We can do a multiplication, or instead of doing this, we can also do W transpose X. What is the W transpose X? We are taking 0.4, 0.3 and 0.2, that is getting multiplied with 8, 90 and then 75. So that is the reason you can see the very first operation that is happening inside a neuron is you are multiplying the input with its associated weight, W transpose X. And next comes the concept, there is B. The B is a constant that is being added to it. For example, let us assume if if all of these input values are 0, the very first understanding why we require bias is if the value x1, x2, x3, if the values are 0, then this whole term becomes 0. Then there is nothing that this particular neuron is processing. There is no information this particular neuron sends it to a next neuron. So in order to avoid it, I don't want to send a 0 to a next neuron. So if you want to avoid sending 0 to next neuron, what is the only way? We can add to this 0, we can add some small constant value, so that instead of sending a 0, at least we are sending 0.1, which is a small value, at least is being processed from this particular neuron. So that is one reason why we add one constant, which is b, always a very small value that is being added. Now comes the question, why we need to add a very small value? Why not a large value is being, why not add a large value? Now say for example, it is just for an example, when you multiply input with the weight, for example, let us assume the resultant of it we are getting some 23.5. I am just giving an example. When you multiply some values of input with its weight, we are getting this 23.5. For this, if you are going to add a very large value, then the entire resultant we are going to change it. We are changing the value, so which is not correct. So because of this, we are adding a very small value, which is 0.1, so that the resultant, by adding this 0.1, whatever the value that we are going to get, there is no much difference to what that summation value we had got. So the bias terms, bias is being added in order to avoid the summation value being 0, so that you can avoid this neuron not processing any information. The second most important concept why bias is being added is, how can you understand what is the importance, what is the role of the bias is, if you look into this, it is a straight line equation. So mx plus c, so this is a straight line equation. Suppose if we doesn't have this term, then always the line will pass through an origin. The line will pass through origin. Now what is the problem if a line passes through an origin? There is a very high possibility that the learning will not be correct. There is a high possibility that there can be a misclassification. Now, by adding the bias, how is that we are avoiding the misclassification? Let us understand this. When a bias term is being added, the line not necessarily will go through the origin, the line will be shifted either above, below, right, left, the line will be shifted as you are seeing here. When a line is being shifted, the learning is appropriate, and there is very high chances that you can avoid a misclassification. That is the role of bias in this particular term, in this particular concept. So from this slide, what is that we are understanding? We are seeing a mathematical representation of a neuron. So how is what is a mathematical representation? Inside a neuron, there are two operations that are taking place. One, we are performing a summation, and whatever is the resultant of this summation is then passed to an activation function. Yeah, so let us try to understand what is the role of an activation function here. Now, whatever is the result that is obtained from this summation, that is given to an activation function. This activation function decides whether sufficient signal is being, whether the strength of a signal is sufficient so that we can trigger a response. So how a biological neural system, once there is a sufficient, once the signal is strong enough, how a neuron is going to trigger a response, that is being mimicked by using an activation function concept in artificial neuron. Now, so what activation function is being used, that we will be seeing shortly, but for now you understand that it is being passed to an activation function, and the role of an activation function here is whether you should trigger or whether you should fire a neuron or not firing a neuron. So this is what is the biological representation of a neuron. From this we are entering into the first and the oldest form of a neural network called a perceptron. Perceptron is an algorithm which is invented in the year 1958 by Frank Rosenfeld. It is an algorithm which is mainly designed for a supervised learning problems only, and more specifically perceptron is designed only for a binary classification. What is a binary classification? Where you just have only two classes. We can have either 0, 1, or it can be yes or no, or it can be true or false. So the perceptron is mainly designed to solve a supervised learning problems only. If this is the case, how do the architecture of a perceptron model looks like? The perceptron consists of an input layer and we will have an output layer. So there is no hidden layer in a perceptron model, or we can say a single layer perceptron, that we will be seeing shortly. The term single layer perceptron you will learn shortly. Now this is so what was the main aim of designing this perceptron? Initially when the perceptron was designed, it was designed to solve logical problems such as and, or, nor problems, basically which has an binary outputs. So here is the representation of an perceptron. Now if you look into an these models, if you look into and, or nor, if you see this, we have an binary inputs. So because there is an binary input, let us take we have two inputs x1 and x2. If you look into 0 0 0 1 1 0 1 1. So since you have two inputs here, it is there are two neurons x1 and x2, and the output of this, if you consider it as AND gate, 0 0 it is 0, it is 0 0, and 1 1 it is 1. So since the output is either 0 or 1, we just have we will have only one neuron at an output layer. So when you pass an input, so when you understand this, you have an x1 and x2, so you are passing it to an neuron where you have a summation operation and you have an activation function operation. So the very first operation what we are going to do is an summation. So how do we perform a summation? We have x1 multiplied with its weight, x2 multiplied with its weight, and then we have also seen that there is a bias term that is being added to it. So this is what is the summation part, and the result of this summation, the z value, is given to an activation function. And here the activation function that is used in perceptron will be either a step activation function or it is a threshold activation function. Now what is a step activation function? If the resultant value, if the z value is less than 0, then the output will be 0. If the z value is greater than or equal to 0, the output is 1. So that is what is a step activation function. Then we have a threshold. Instead of 0 here, we can have some threshold value. If the resultant, if the summation resultant is greater than or equal to certain threshold value, we get one output. If it is less than a threshold value, we get an other output. So from this, what are we understanding? It's a perceptron. It is an supervised, it is an first and oldest neural network model, mainly designed for a supervised learning. It is used to solve a binary classification. It is mainly designed to solve a binary classification problems only. So what are the different components of a perceptron? We have an input and we have the weights associated with each of the input. We have an weighted sum where we add the bias term also, and then the resultant of the weighted sum is being passed to an activation function, and the activation function that is used in a perceptron will be either a step activation or a threshold activation, and then we are going to get an output. So this is what is the perceptron. So let us understand this, what we have seen mathematically some time back. Let us understand this with a simple example. If our suppose there is a requirement where you want to classify whether given input is a spam or whether it is not a spam. For that we have three input features. One is how many number of suspicious words. Let us take it as x1, and what is the percentage of capital letters that are used in the subject, that is our second feature x2, and if there are how many number of links that are available, which is given as that is our third feature x3. Because we have our 3 input x1 whose value is 4, x2 value is 0.2 and x3 the value is 2. So if you consider our data set, if we have 3 features where we have x1, x2 and x3, where x1 is a number of suspicious words and x2 is the percentage of capital letters and x3 is the number of links. And for the first input we have the value 4, 0.2 and we have the input 2. Let us assume you have a data set like this. So how do you design neural network for this? Since you have 3 features, we are going to have 3. Now, since it is an perceptron, there is only an input layer and you just have only an output layer. Since it is a binary classification, you are going to have only one neuron at an output layer. So this is an input and this is an output. Now, you are going to establish a connection from one you are going to establish a connection and we are going to have weights on each of these connection. So since we have 3 inputs, there are 3 weights. Now what are those values? Here are the values. What is the W1 value? 0.8, W2 value 0.5 and W3 value 0.3. And what exactly the operation takes place here? We have a summation and we will have an activation. What is the summation here? It is x1 W1 plus x2 W2 plus x3 W3, and we know that there is a bias term that is being added. So just substitute the values. What is x1 value? X1 value is 4 and W1 value is 0.8 and x2 value is 0.2 and W2 value is 0.5. x3 value is 2 and W3 value is 0.3, and then we are adding a bias term. What is the bias value given? Bias value given here is 0.5. So when we perform this entire operation, the resultant value what we are getting is 4.4. Now, once we get the summation, the resultant of this is then passed to an activation function. Now, what is a role of an activation function? Here it can be either a step activation function or it is a threshold activation function. So here we are taking a threshold activation function, and what is a threshold that we have fixed? The threshold that we have fixed is 3. Now, what is the summation value that we have got? The summation value what we have got is 4.4. Now, that is being compared with the threshold. What is the threshold value? The threshold value is 3. Since the summation value S that we have calculated is greater than or equal to a threshold value, the output is 1. If the value for example, if there is some input value and if you multiply it with the weights, if the resultant value is less than the threshold, then the output will be 0. Since here for the example that we have taken, the value summation value is 4.4 and the threshold value is 3, since the summation is greater than a threshold value, the output of this is 1. So what is 1 here? What is our problem statement? Since it is a binary classification, what is the binary classification? Whether it is 1 or 0. 1 is whether it is a spam, and 0 it is not a spam, not a spam. So here the output what we have got is 1, therefore maybe this particular input is classified it as it is a spam. So this is how a simple working mechanism. Our model has classified it as a spam. The output what we got is 1, but what if the output the correct output was 0? So that means something went wrong in this entire. What would have gone wrong? Input is something that is given to us. So we cannot do any changes with the input. So in this entire process, there is something that we have assumed. What is that we have assumed? We have assumed these weights. Weights are something which is not given to us in our data set. Go back and then imagine a data set. A data set will have only the features, and you will have, and if it is a supervised one, you will have a target labels. But the weights are something that we are assuming. So if the weights that what you have assumed is wrong, then definitely the output what we are going to get will be an incorrect output. The prediction made by the model will be an incorrect prediction. So therefore, here comes the learning algorithm. The most important concept which we are going to study next will be the learning algorithm. So what exactly happens here? Suppose if there is a misclassification. So what we have assumed, the weights are something that we have assumed, and there is a bias term. We have taken some constant value. Maybe that constant value what we have assumed also was not a correct one. Then we have to come back and then change these, update these weights. That is done by an algorithm called Perceptron learning algorithm. One of the most important concept. I request the learners to focus here. Perceptron learning algorithm. So before we get into what is the very first step that we require an input, which means we have x1, x2 and so on up to xn. So we need an input. Then we are going to assume certain weights for each of the input. If you have 5 inputs, there will be 5 weights associated with each of this. So you need to set, the very first step is you need to set the weights, and then you should also assume the bias. You should also set a bias, and these are randomly initialized. And there is also something called as a learning rate, eta. We are also choosing one random value, which is a learning rate. Let us see what is the role of this. So once this is done, so once you initialize the weights bias, what is that we are going to do? For each of the input, we are first going to calculate this is the first step. For each of the input values, we are computing the summation, the weighted sum. How is that we are going to do? It is x into wf, and if you have a multiple, it is x w transpose x. This is the first weighted sum that we are going to perform. Once we calculate the weighted sum, the resultant of this is being passed to an activation function. So here the activation function, as I said, either it can be a step activation or it can be a threshold activation. So what exactly the role of an activation function? Whatever is the resultant of this summation value, if it is greater than or equal to a threshold, we get a value 1. If it is less than a threshold, we get a value 0. Now, once we calculate this threshold, then whatever, that is the ultimate output that we get. Now, whatever is the output that we have obtained, we call it as a predicted output, or we call it as a computed output. So it can be any one of this terminology. Now, for every of the input, there is a ground truth. There is something called as an target. For every of the input, when you consider your data set, you will have during a training phase, if it is a supervised, data set, supervised learning data set, where you will have a label. So for every of the input, you will have an associated label already, right? So now you have passed the first sample, and the model has predicted something. Let us assume it was supposed to be 1, but the model has predicted it as 0. Now, when model has predicted it as 0, what is the next step that we do? We are going to calculate the error. What is, why is that we need to, how is that you calculate, and why is that we need to calculate it? Because our ultimate aim is the model has to predict a correct output. What is the correct output here? The correct output is 1, but what is that our model has predicted? The model has predicted it as 0. So it is an incorrect prediction. So what is that we will do? How is that we will get to know that it is incorrect prediction? So we calculate an error. What is the formula that we that is used to calculate? It is a target minus a computed. What is the target? The ground truth is already known to us. Target is 1. And what is computed? Computed is something which the model has predicted, 0. So the result what we are getting is 1. So because there is an error, now what is that we do? We come back. And once we come back, what is that we have to, why is that you want to come back? You are going to update the weights and you are going to update the bias, because the weights and bias are something which are randomly initialized. When it is randomly initialized, maybe it is not a correct value. So because it is randomly initialized, we have to come back and then update. How is that we update? What is the weight updation formula? Now the weight updation formula is this. The new weight is old weight plus delta WF. What is the delta WF? Delta WF is, there is a learning rate and whatever is the error that we have calculated, target minus computed, and then you will multiply it with its weight, because which weight we want to update. So if you are updating this W1, W1 is the weight associated with this input X1. So for which input you are updating that weight. So that input is also written here. So this is the weight updation formula, very important concept. W new is equal to W old plus delta W. What is this delta W? It is a learning rate multiplied with error, that is target minus computed, and multiplied with its input X. This is how you update the weights, but we have bias also. So how is that we update the bias? Same formula. The new bias value is old bias value plus the learning rate multiplied with the target minus computed. Now you can ask the question, why we don't have B or like how we have Xi, why we don't have any term? By default it is always 1. So because of this we will not be writing anything here. So this is the weight updation formulas. You once you get the output, we are going to calculate the error. If the error is more, we are coming back and then we are updating the weights. How are we updating the weights? The weight updation formula is W new is W old plus change in the delta W. What is delta W? Delta W is learning rate, error multiplied with the input. Similar way we are going to update the bias also, and the formula for bias is new bias is old bias plus learning rate and the error. So this concept let us understand by using a simple numerical example. Now let us see, there are two inputs X1 and X2, and these two inputs values are 1.1 and 2. And what exactly mean by this? We have an data which is X1 and we have X2. X1 value is this, and we have the target which is denoted as Y, and this value is 1. So this is the input and this is the ground truth for this input. Now let us solve this particular problem. What is the first step? You need to calculate Z. How is that we calculate Z? X1 multiplied with WF, X2 multiplied with WF, and the bias term. What is X1? X1 value is 1, and what is W1 value? 0.2 plus X2, the value is 2, and what is W2? Minus 0.5 plus, and there is a bias term which is 0.1. So this is the data which we have initialized, and then the very first step is you are calculating Z. So when we solve this problem, so you can solve along with me. So we are going to get the value. So this is minus 0.7. So we got Z value as minus 0.7. Now what is the next step? That is passed to an activation function in our neuron. First step is a summation and second is an activation. So we have calculated the summation part. Now what is an activation function? So look at the activation function what we have taken. If the value is less than or equal to 0, then the output is 0, otherwise the output is 1. So what is the Z value? Z value, if it is less than or equal to 0, then you are going to get the value 0. If it is if it is greater than 0, you get the output 1. Okay. Now what is the Z value? Z value is minus 0.7. So definitely the output from this activation function what we got is 0. So that means for this input the output what model has predicted is 0. So the predicted one, let us denote it as y hat, and what is the result? The result is 0. Now once we get this, as per the perceptron learning algorithm, what is the you have initialized weights, all this you have done, you have computed the input weight, you have computed the activation function, then you have to calculate the error. What is the formula to calculate the error? The formula to calculate the error is a target minus computed. What is a target? A target is 1, and what is computed? The computed value is 0. So what is the error that we have got? The error that we have got here is 1. The error, one second. Yeah, so the error what we have got is 1. Okay. So once you calculate the error, what is the next step? You have calculated the error. Now we have to go back and then update the weights. So what is the formula to update the weight? So I am showing here W new is equal to W old plus change in the weight. So W, this is given as the learning rate and the target minus, so we will call it as an error, and we have to update the weight. Now which weight we are updating? You have to update both the weights. You have to update W1 and W2 both, because W1 and W2 and bias we should update all three. So W1 is something associated with X1. So substitute the values. What is learning rate? Learning rate is given as 0.1. What is the error that we have got? The error we got is 1. And what is the X1 value? X1 value is 1. What is change in the what is this value? We are going to get 0.1 delta W. With this, go back and then substitute back in this. What is the old weight? The old weight value is 0.2, and what is this delta? It is 0.1. Therefore the new W1 what we have got is 0.3. This is W1. 0.3. Similar way, you calculate W2 and then let us see what is the value that we are going to get. I am going to solve here for W2. W2, since the formula is here, I am looking into this formula and then substituting. What is first, let us calculate delta W. Delta W is a learning rate 0.1, and what is the error that we have got? The error is 1, and what is X2 in the, now we are updating W2. W2 is something, is the weight which is associated with X2. What is X2? It is 2. So what is delta W2 value here? It is 0.2. So go back and then calculate what is W2 new weight. What is W2 old weight? It is minus 0.5 plus change 0.2. So W2 value what we are going to get is minus 0.3. Can you see here what is that we have done? Initially the weights were 0.2 and minus 0.5, but that is not the correct weights. The correct by changing the weight, what we got is W1 value as 0.3 and the W2 value what we have got is minus 0.3. Now it is, with this we should also calculate the bias term. Let us see how do you update the bias. Let us solve calculating the bias. Okay, let us see how to calculate the, how do we update the bias. So, what is the formula to update the bias? Bias is the old bias plus the learning rate, the error. So, what is the old bias value? 0.1. What is the learning rate? 0.1. And what is the error? The error is 1. So, what is the bias? 0.1 plus 0.1, it is 0.2. So, with this, the new parameters what we have got, WF is, it is 0.3 minus 0.3, and the bias what we have got is 0.2. Can you see the difference? Earlier the weights were 0.2 minus 0.5 and the bias is 0.1. Now the new parameters, the new weights are 0.3 and minus 0.3 and the bias is 0.2. Now does it mean that these are the standard or correct values? Now for this let us go back and then solve the problem again to understand what is our input x1 and x2 value. From our previous we have seen it is 1 and 2. Okay. So, let us calculate again. First step is calculating z. It is x1 w1 plus x2 w2 plus bias. What is x1? It is 1. What is the weight? Now you will use the updated weight. What is x2? It is 2. What is the new? Minus 0.3 plus bias 0.2. So z value what we are going to calculate this, we get 0.3 minus 0.6 plus 0.2. What we are going to get is minus 0.1. This is the z value. Now, so summation part is done. Now you have to pass it to an activation function. What is activation function? If the value is less than or equal to 0, it is 0. So therefore, y hat what we are going to get is 0. With this we are calculating the error. What is error? Target minus computed. What is target? 1. Computed is 0. So error value what we are getting is 1. Still there is an error. So because there is an error, again we are going back and then we are updating the weights. How are we updating the weights? By now you should know the formula. W new is W old plus delta WF. What is delta WF? It is the learning rate, error, and to which weights we are updating? Both x1, x2 weights and bias. So input x1. So let us solve W. What is learning rate? Eta 0.1, and what is the error? Error is 1. What is the input? Input is 1. So what is delta W? Delta W what we are going to get is 0.1. With this W new weight, once again let us see what is the old weight. Old weight is now 0.3 plus 0.1, which is now 0.4. W1 value is 0.4. I think you are getting the concept. Similar way, let us calculate W2, because since you are now familiarized, I am directly solving a W2 value. So the old W2 value is 0.3 plus the learning rate is 0.1. And then what is the error? Error is 1, and 1 it is 0. Okay, let us take W2 is learning rate is 0.1, error is this, and then the input is 2. So we have we have a 2 value here. I am sorry. So we have yeah, it is 0.2. So this entire delta W what we are getting. So when you multiply, W2 is minus 0.1. This is our W2 value. So earlier and similar way, when we go back and then calculate the bias. So let us see bias. What is the old bias value? The previous bias value was 0.2 plus the learning rate is 0.1 into error is 1. So the bias what we are getting is 0.3. With this, the new parameters WF are 0.1 minus 0.1 minus 0.4 and minus 0.1, and bias is 0.3. Can you see? Both the values are here. First initial values what we had considered, W1, W2 are 0.2 and minus 0.5 and bias value is 0.1, and after updating we have got a W value as 0.3 and minus 0.3, and we have updated the bias. With that we have seen whether the value what we are getting is right. No, we were not getting a correct value, still there was an error. Again we went back and then we have updated the weights. So, let us see, by updating the weights, now are we getting the correct. So, let us go back and then calculate. So, what is x1 and x2? The x1 and x2 is 1 and 2. What is w? The w value what we have calculated is 0.4 minus 0.1, and what is the bias? New bias that we have calculated is 0.3. So, with this we are calculating z. How will you calculate z? x1 w1 plus x2 w2 plus bias. What is x1 1 0.4 plus x2 2 minus 0.1 plus bias 0.3. So, it is 0.4, this is minus 0.2 plus 0.3. So, z value what we got is 0.5. This is z value that we have got. Now, once we get the summation, you will be passing it to an activation. What is activation? So, if the value is go back and then see what is if the value is less than or equal to 0, it is 0, but our value what we got is greater than. So, therefore, the y hat is 1, the predicted value is 1. So, now you will calculate the error. What is the error? The error is a target minus computed. Target value is 1, computed value. So, error value what we got is 0. So, when the error value is 0, that means now the weights that you have taken are the correct weights. Therefore, the correct parameters are the w value is 0.4 and minus 0.1, and the bias value is 0.3. Therefore, now how do the final decision boundary looks like? So, our summation is a W transpose X plus B, right. So, this the final decision boundary by end of a training, what we are going to get is the way it is x1 W1 plus x2 W2 plus bias, right. So, what is our W1? It is 0.4. What is W2? It is minus 0.1. And what is the bias? 0.3. So, can we write our equation 0.1 x2 x plus 0.3 will be 0. This is the final decision boundary that we have got by end of our training. Now, what is the role of this? Why do we require this? Now, see, once the training is done, this is what the model is learning. By end of a training, why you feel that the training is completed? Because we have run it for certain epochs, and then we are seeing that the error is also 0 now. So, we are stopping a training, and this is the decision boundary that we got. Now, let us assume during the testing phase for our training, we had taken the input 1 and 2, and we were knowing the ground truth is 1. Now, during the testing phase, let us assume we got input 1 and 2, and we want to know what is the output. We want to know this. So, with this, what is x1? The new x1 value is 2 and x2 value is 1. And where are these values coming from? During the testing, the new sample has entered, and then we want to see what is the prediction for this particular input. So, how do the system works? So, during training, it has already built the decision boundary, right? So, for that you just substitute. And then see what is the value that we are going to get. It is here, since definitely the z value is 1, correct. So, which is z value is 1.0, yeah. So now since the value is greater than 0, the y hat value is 1. So for the new input, what model is going to predict is 1. So this is what the model, this is how the model is going to predict. If you want, you can take one more example. Let us assume the new example, the new sample what we got is 0 and 5. Substitute the values back into this, calculate the z, 0.4 into 0 minus 0.1 into 5 plus 0.3. So when we calculate the z value, what we are going to get is minus 0.2, which is less than 0. So for this, the predicted value will be 0. Suppose if an input is 0 and 5, the model is going to predict the output as 0. So with this, we have come to an end of a session where we have learnt in detail about single layer perceptron, and then we have seen, we have learnt the algorithm of single layer perceptron. Thus we will be stopping the session, and in the upcoming session we will be learning the different types of perceptrons, what are the limitations of this single layer perceptron, and then let us also learn the single layer perceptron with one more numerical example. That is what you are going to study in the next session. Thank you.